Arteta! What a strike! What a screamer! And a fantastic goal! Arsenal back in it! And here's Liverpool, lines it up, finds the net. Arsenal are in front.
Arsenal are through to the next round of the FA Cup after a performance that featured two starkly contrasting 45-minute segments. If only there was a cliche to sum that up. This is the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast. My name's Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. I mean, a game of two periods of starkly contrasting football performance. Wow. You know what? We'll workshop it, but I'm pretty sure there's got to be a cliche that sums up when a team plays very differently over 45-minute increments. In any event, gosh, we've got news. Why don't I do this first? Paul's on Twitter at Paz in my pants. Hello, Paz.
Woohoo.
Tim's on Twitter at Soberto. Hello, Tim.
Hello there.
Clive is taking the pod off because he's been on so many pods, and he's like, you know what, mate? I could use a break, and it'll help you speed it up because we don't have a lot of time to record this one. And what he has been doing since determining that he will be left out of this pod is WhatsApping me all the points he wants to make in the pod. So I love Clive. I absolutely love Clive. The passion, you really cannot replace the passion. Okay, so I said there was news, and there is news. We have winners. I finally got around to picking winners. And I do want to say, I still have a shirt that I have to send out from a previous winner of a previous thing. And with my baby being born, it just escaped me. No excuse. So that will be going out. But here we go. Announcement time. And we'll be putting this in social media posts as well. The Arsenal shirt of your choice has been won by Martin Heinrich. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Martin Heinrich. We will be emailing you. The year subscription to The Athletic went to Emmanuel Lane. And I actually think Emmanuel Lane and I have interacted on the social medias quite a bit. So yeah. So good stuff for Emmanuel. You will be able to subscribe to The Athletic for a year for free, assuming that's something you want. If not, get in touch. We can maybe figure something out. But of course you want The Athletic. And then the year subscription to Patreon went to Alana Corrigan. So those are your winners. We'll be announcing it on social media, and then, of course, emailing all of you individually. Just get in touch, and we'll get it sorted out. Hey, so we have our first transfer pod and our first analytics pod of the new year up on Patreon. Both are now live. You can go to Patreon, sign up for that. As I mentioned in the last pod, we're going to be eliminating programmatic advertising on this podcast. It is basically a situation where between Patreon and growing and just our appreciation for the support, we feel that, look, it is a wonderful thing to be able to put this podcast together for everybody, and we want it to be something that everyone enjoys, and we certainly don't want an excess of advertising getting in the way of that. And we obviously talk about The Athletic and Patreon quite a bit, so the trade-off is that we've opted to eliminate the advertising, and I hope that is a fair balance. And in respect to that, then I hope you might consider giving us a sign up on Patreon or signing up for The Athletic. And one thing to think about with The Athletic is it is transfer month, and you get a month free and 50% off with our promo code, theathletic.com/ArsenalVision. So why not just use the free month for transfer month? Get all of Ornstein's articles, get all the breaking news. You can read Michael Cox's breakdown of Arteta's system and what he's changed since he's arrived. It's an interesting one. So if you're ever going to do a month free, a transfer window month seems like a good time to do it. Theathletic.com/ArsenalVision. Okay, enough of that. Sorry for the prolonged housekeeping. Arsenal are through to the next round of the FA Cup, where I believe we have Bournemouth away, which has never been a tricky fixture for us, so no concerns there whatsoever. Tim, just really quickly, I think Arteta had a tricky situation here in picking the lineup because he had a squad full of clearly shattered players after United, but he also has a league season that, if not totally dead, is barely clinging on life support, and the FA Cup is a legitimate shot at a trophy. And if you're a new coach of a big club, you can't turn your nose up at the FA Cup if your league campaign looks pretty much toast. So he had to get this one right, and maybe he just about did, as the result proves. But I'm curious to get your sense of how he balanced it. Did you feel that maybe he should have opted to rest more or rested too many? Did you have a sense one way or the other, the way he picked the team?
No, I thought he got it spot on, actually. I wasn't that interested in the idea of resting players. I think resting players is something that that has become like a big preoccupation for fans in recent years. And I think it's bigger for fans than it is for coaches. But it's interesting. It's it's something I read about a lot. I think there's like a lot of anxiety around it for all fans. I kind of looked at it and I thought, well, the only players that have played constantly this year are Leno, who's the goalkeeper anyway, but he got rested and that's kind of fine. Aubameyang, yep, absolutely, rest him. And then like maybe Torreira, although Torreira had been subbed a lot under Emery, so I didn't think there were that many players that really needed a rest. It was 5 days since the last game. It's 5 days until the next one. And if we're talking about bringing the players up to the level of intensity that Mikel Arteta is looking for, then I think the best way to do that is probably to play them. They have a lot of data and things like that. And if they think that people are close to muscle injuries or whatever, then they can act on that. But no, I thought it was spot on, and not least because Leeds are really good. Leeds are better than most of the bottom half of the Premier League, I think. I think they're a championship team in name only at the moment, and we had to treat them like we would have like a half decent Premier League team.
And I don't think you can analyze this game, Tim, without at least tipping your hat to the tenacious, exceptional pressing that Leeds does and the work that Bielsa has done with them. And so, any story of this game, I think, it's going to be so easy to default to things like effort and energy and trying hard and caring and the right attitude. But I do think that you have to at least be mindful of crediting Leeds for the impressive work they do pressing the ball, and pressing teams have caused us problems in the past. So I don't think it's totally crazy to be vulnerable to that. Real quick, Tim, before I ask Paul a question, I don't remember the quote exactly, but one of the things that I think you put out there about Arteta that really encouraged you was that he talked about how the energy is a minimum requirement, and we've discussed this in the past, that it's not just about effort, that it's about position, but clearly energy was an issue in this game, and he was able to get it turned around. Was that quote sort of something ringing in your ears as you watched this game? Because I think one of the questions we had is, okay, they turned up against United, they turned up against Chelsea, will they turn up against a small team? And maybe this was sort of the first chance for Arteta to correct an attitude issue.
Yeah, and I think it was valuable for that as well. And he seemed to say that afterwards. Look, Arteta knows Bielsa's coaching inside out. Bielsa is possibly the most influential coach currently working in the game. In fact, I don't think there's any possibly about it. He's hugely influential. And how Bielsa's teams play, and that's another reason I saw this as a tough draw, because I know how his teams play. I watched his Chile team, I watched his Argentina team, and they're like, and actually the other I think possibly bright positive thing for us is that Bielsa has managed to coach a far inferior group to the group that we have to play in that. Both technically and physically play to that level. Arteta's looking at a fairly similar blueprint, because Pep is hugely influenced by Bielsa, which means that Arteta is hugely influenced by Bielsa, and that's a positive note for us as well. I wouldn't be surprised if he said something like that to the players, like, look, this is like a championship squad, and look what it's doing. Like, so imagine what I expect of you. Given the fact that we kind of got away with it in the first half and we weren't a goal or two behind, which we probably deserved, it was valuable in terms of him being able to say, it's almost like a kind of a magic eye pick for the team. Like, once you see it, you really see it, and it's there's a very before and after quality to it. It's like, you can either play like you did in the first half, or you can play like you did in the second half, and I'll leave you to choose which one you think is better and which one you think worked better. So hopefully a valuable lesson for them going forward. Yeah,
and we'll talk a little bit more about what Arteta may have said and the impact it had. But Paul, I think, look, Leeds press is really good, but it takes two to tango. And it took some really bad Arsenal passing to make Leeds press look even better than it was. There was room to attack them in behind, and we did have some good counterattacking opportunities. I felt that they were vulnerable even when they were dominating, because of the extent to which they were leaving themselves exposed at the back. We just couldn't hit a pass to save our life. I thought Holding obviously had a bit of a mare. We're going to get to the midfield. I think it is probably the biggest talking point of the game in terms of how they played in the two halves, and then going forward, what it means for how Arteta will want to set up. Obviously, it doesn't help Holding, having Sokratis as a fullback on one side, that's not ideal. But he's a rusty player, and he's a player who hasn't played a lot. He's just coming back. Do you think that the passing out from the back, and in particular Holding, really created do you think that it was a factor of Leeds being exceptional? How much of it do you think was self-inflicted, largely just bad passing?
So I've actually weirdly watched quite a bit of Leeds this year, following my boy Eddie. And I know there's a perception he didn't play, but he played for them 17 times, often from the bench, often 45 minutes or 20 minutes. And he had 3 starts, I think. So I ended up watching them a lot and playing against them. This is how they play, just on steroids. They love playing away from home. I think they won 8 of their last 9 away games because they've more space to play into. The other team comes at them. And they play system players. Bamford, sorry about that. Bamford is not a better player than Nketiah. But I guess A, they own him, and B, he's a system player. They brought on Helder Costa in the second half, he's an exciting player. Like the theory that you play all your best players and then work out a system from them, that's not what Bielsa does. He's basically playing the Stepford wives. The first half was like a bunch of spider monkeys, but with a really good plan and system. Everything they did worked. All the passes came off. They were first into all the challenges. They were high energy. They were basically saying, announcing themselves to the Premier League, and they had nothing to lose. So they deserve huge credit in the first half. The question was, could they sustain it? No, they couldn't.
I would only take issue with that to say that I don't think it's just that they didn't sustain it. I think that we did things to relieve it. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. But still, I don't think any of us were really shocked that should not have been shocked that they were good. They came at us, that they covered the pitch. They had this 4-1-4-1. Phillips is a really good DM. And they just, every one of them hit their passes, made the runs. All the angles were perfect. They were perfect in the first half. They just don't have a top class finisher. That's where Eddie comes in. That's why Eddie actually got a pretty good look in at Leeds from time to time, because Bamford's a brilliant system player, but tends to almost score and not quite score. And we saw that in this first half. We had a lot of issues, but my simple summary of how we set up is very Emery era. We had Xhaka and Guendouzi in midfield. That leg hasn't been broken and reset yet under Emery. And then the other key piece of it would have been, as you hit on, Sokratis at right back, who I think was okay and was a good out ball for headers from the keeper and helped relieve a bit of press. But he was not Maitland-Niles shifting to form a 3 in midfield. So this really wasn't a Arteta era setup. We played very much like an Emery team, bad spaces, kind of raggedy, all over the place. I'm not sure, actually, we did that much different in the second half, except we really came at them and they dropped a little. And our individual performances and our individual efforts really came to the fore in the second half. We outplayed them, but not from some beautiful structure, just the synchronicities between the boys and the extra half a yard they got. We started knocking it around them and they couldn't do it to us. So I do think the big pieces of it were that. I mean, when you think of an Arteta team at the moment, you got some Maitland-Niles action on the right-hand side, allowing Kolasinac to get up the wing on the left-hand side. Kolasinac never got out of the back four in the first half. I almost didn't notice him. And as you said, the shame of it was we did have at least 4 or 5 good counters in the first half, and basically they all ran down a cul-de-sac. So there's a whole final third piece of our counters. I mean, we had, I was just making a note of them, we had Nelson, Pepe, Luis, Xhaka, and Lacazette all streaked down the field in the first 25 minutes of the game to no effect. Other people not making themselves available or them not making the right choices. So the good news is there's huge upside to this. And as you guys alluded to, I think this was a necessary thing to go through. We beat Man United. There's that emotional release. We think we've got the hang of this thing. We're playing some ankle biters from down the table or the championship in the next game. And we, despite saying to ourselves everything we needed to say beforehand, that the hive mind of the team hasn't linked into how big you're going to have to dig in the first half to match them, and required a hairdryer speech at halftime to kind of ignite the fire.
Well, and sometimes it's just a case of getting the wrong team at the wrong time, right? So like, Tim, what I mean by that is if we had faced a championship team whose approach was sit really deep and defend and try to hit us on the counter, that may not have been as big a problem for a team that was struggling for energy and, maybe shows up a little bit half-assed. But against Leeds, you have to be is sharp and intense and switched on, right? I mean, you're going to get more opportunities to get into space and attack them if you can get past their press, but you got to be switched on, and we weren't. And so we paid for it, and they had us on the rack. I think that the way I look at it, they man-marked everybody, right? So Guendouzi was man-marked off the ball. Xhaka was man-marked off the ball. And I think those two deserve a lot of, I hate to use the word blame, but responsibility for the challenges we had in the first half, because I don't think they worked hard enough to get free of their marker, to give people an option. And there was one very clear moment where Holding played a terrible ball. I mean, it's a terrible ball to be fair, but he played it thinking Xhaka would come back to the ball, work back to the ball for him, and he didn't. And the ball was picked off, and it created a really dangerous attack. Now, look, Holding was really poor with his passing all game. He's very rusty. You don't want to kill a guy who's just coming back from injury, but it's a worry. I mean, obviously, it's a worry against better opposition. He probably would have been punished. But I do think that there's a big story of this game that is how the midfield performed first half, second half. And the two biggest differences for me, in the first half, I thought we played just too deep generally. There was one of those moments where Luiz was sitting basically next to Martinez and played everybody on side, and it's one of the things that Clive has really pointed out all season. But the other big thing was just the midfielders not working hard enough to be available. And you pointed this out on Twitter. There's really two ways that you can play around a press like this. You can beat it with one-touch passing, or you can dribble past it. And we weren't able to beat it with one-touch passing. And Pepe on occasion dribbled past it, but with Guendouzi and Xhaka, we didn't really have that escapability. So do you want to maybe explore a little bit what Xhaka and Guendouzi did so poorly in the first half that prevented us from being able to play our way out?
Yeah, I mean, quite often they just had their back to play. They had their back to the opposition.
Oh,
so
the opposition.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So they're like collecting the ball off of the centre halves, not on the half turn. And when you've already got a Leeds player like halfway up your backside already, you're having to give yourself another touch to kind of get free. But I don't think that's necessarily what changed in the second half. I think in the second half, everyone just moved about 10 yards further up the pitch. So all of a sudden, Guendouzi and Xhaka were kind of on the halfway line instead of, really deep in their own half and having to panic because they might get robbed of the ball. And I don't think necessarily, I'm not sure what the data says about this. I didn't have the impression that we were technically hugely cleaner in the second half. I didn't get the impression that it was kind of the technical level that went up per se. I mean, look at the goal. Quite a scrappy goal. I think it is just the intensity went up. I really do think on this occasion it was kind of that simple, that it was that kind of intangible. I don't think, like I said, I think certain players, the defensive line probably got 10 yards further up the pitch. And after that, I really do think it was just a case of aggression and maybe being a bit more prepared, because Arteta said afterwards, didn't he? Look, I told them what to expect. But sometimes, I suppose, being told isn't quite enough. If you think in your mind, oh yeah, but they're championship, aren't they? And we've got quite a strong team out today, so we'll probably be okay.
Tim, I did a quick check on the stats, and just if you look at pass success rate, the first half we were 71%, and the second half we were 74% in pass success. So, like you say, not a huge difference.
Yeah, exactly. That's better, but not enormously better. I would imagine we were on the ball a bit more maybe, but And also, you've got to take in other soft factors, I guess, which is that like the whole issue with Bielsa team. Like Bielsa, I think I'm right in saying Bielsa's never won a trophy in his career, because what happens to his teams is with 10 games to go, they completely explode.
Sounds like Pochettino to me.
Yeah, and who did Pochettino play under as a player and was hugely influenced by? Because Bielsa likes to work with small squads, because his instructions are so specific that he doesn't feel he can rotate. And that goes for in-game as well. So, Leeds, I don't think Leeds were ever going to quite be able to do that for 90 minutes. Their mistake, which wasn't really due to anything we did, was that they didn't convert their dominance. And actually, that's probably a mistake we made against Chelsea, not converting that dominance. When you have a super intense start, what you need to do is you need to go at least 2 goals clear when you do that, so that you've got something to defend. So I think there's kind of that to it, which probably wasn't really down to anything that we did. But I felt that we tried to get the ball to Pepe in slightly more advantageous positions as well. So rather than like Sokratis shuffling the ball 5 to 10 yards up the line for him, where he's not facing our goal and he's got a Leeds player on his back, we were creating angles so that Guendouzi and Xhaka were getting the ball to him from the side, so that he could receive in a better body position and go side on. And this other thing I know that Arteta's trying to coach them is not to pass the ball until the opponent's engaged. So particularly with the fullbacks, he's telling them to dribble and keep dribbling until someone comes to you. And the second someone comes to you, then you move the ball. And something that we did a lot under Emery and probably latterly under Wenger was just like rolling the ball side to side. And Arteta's whole thing is, no, don't do that. You wait until you see someone move and then you move the ball. And I think we probably did that slightly better. But honestly, I really do think the second half improvement was about 80 to 85% down to soft factors.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that. I also think, look, sometimes it takes you time to come to grips with that style of play, right? I mean, you've got Sokratis playing right back, where he's basically never played for us, up against an intense press. You've got Guendouzi, who's been out of the team a bit, now being pressed aggressively. You've got Holding, who's extremely rusty, facing an intense press without a lot of passing lanes and passing options. I mean, partnerships that aren't really familiar to players, and it takes time to come to terms with that. And, I look at what you lose with a Maitland-Niles, who's technically secure. But I also think, Torreira was a big miss in the first half. A big difference between him and Guendouzi is Torreira will come all the way back to the center back. And there were times in those first 3 games where the center backs would split and Torreira would literally drop between them to collect the ball and build play from the back. Guendouzi was not doing that. To your point, he was facing the ball. He wasn't aware of where his marker was, but he wasn't coming back to the ball enough. I think Xhaka was extremely guilty of not coming back to the ball and making himself available and just doing the work to get free. I also just think in the second half, you may call it a soft factor, but I think we played 10 yards further up the pitch. We were just committed to not getting sucked back into our own penalty area, into our own defensive third. We started possessions higher up, which made it easier for us to progress the ball. The spaces got smaller, and it started to look a little more like Arteta ball. And just so that we don't...
Did you...
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, like, to really, really sum it up, did you see the tweet from the Simpsons Arsenal account? This morning.
Oh no, not this morning, because this morning I've been doing podcast stuff. Yeah.
Like this morning UK time, like it's absolutely perfect. It's just the scene where I think it's an old Halloween episode where Bart gets a crusty doll and it's evil, and then someone picks it up and goes, "Oh, here's the problem," and it's just like the switch on the back is switched to evil instead of good. but he changed it, so he said, "Oh, here's the problem. In the first half, it was set to Emery." And then in the second half, we set it to Arteta, and that's kind of what it felt like.
Yeah, I mean, it sure does. And I mean, the funny thing is, I want to read out these statistics. This comes from Scott in his By the Numbers column for Arsblog. I think this is probably a lot of Opta data too. So in the first half, our shot differential was -12. Second half, +10. XG differential, we were -0.6 XG in the first half. Second half, we're 2.1 plus, 2.1 XG advantage. First half, -16 touches in the box. Second half, 18 positive. First half, -75 final third touches. Second half, +113. So, I mean, the statistics bear out what your eyes are telling you. This was just a better, more dominant performance in the second half. Paul, Guendouzi was getting in the neck a bit in the first half, and I have to admit I was guilty of it. And I think sometimes I feel because I have been such an acolyte, such a believer in Guendouzi, that when he throws up a stinker, I feel compelled to point it out so that I'm not accused of bias because, I'm willing to criticize players when they perform poorly. And with Guendouzi, I should be willing to do that, even though I really believe in his potential. He turned it around and had nearly a man of the match second half performance. And if you want to read Scott's By the Numbers column, he breaks that down as well. Is there something specific to Guendouzi's change in performance half to half that you observed that might explain what he got right that he wasn't getting right in the first half?
No, I generally believe we were very similar in our approach, as were all the players in first and second half. I think, Arteta or
you really believe that? You think the approach was the same? Do you agree with me though that there was a concerted effort to be pushed up a little more? I felt that we were clearly pushing higher up the pitch in the second half.
Sure, but to your point, that requires, we didn't plan to play deep in the first half. That wasn't a plan. They drove us back. I mean, you just have to watch the first 10 or 15 minutes and they're at us like spider monkeys, and everything they do, they just this ESP between them in terms of the runs, the moves, etc. Not too much you can do when it's like in tennis when your opponent's just hitting the ball right in the center of the racket and they're hitting all the lines. I mean, what can you do? They're going to drive you right back. That's what I think happened in the first half. I think their level dropped a little in the second half. I think they were slightly deflated that after all of that. They had 0 goals and we came out charging. I mean, if you look at the first 10 minutes, we basically get the goal at the end of the first 10 minutes. We have 8 opportunities. We're firing, we're pounding at them. Arteta said to run at them like wolves, to use our kind of the animal part of you. And it was just a much more feral approach, but structurally not that different. And with the ball ahead of Guendouzi, he shone. With the ball behind Guendouzi, him drawing the man onto him. I mean, it's great to draw your man onto you. But him and Xhaka in the first half take the pressure and then invite even more pressure, which gives more time to whoever their out ball is. If they knock it back to the centre back or the goalie, they've already signaled which way this is going. And it just, that first half did not suit us and brought out the worst in Xhaka and Guendouzi with their backs to goal. And in the second half, right from the get-go, we played with the ball ahead of us in large part. You saw, especially in the early parts of the second half, Lacazette dropping really deep to help play us out and then pinging it up the wings between him and Pepe. They were big players in getting us going. That was a very important period for Mosul, who didn't have the most energetic game. There was a moment I noted, 15 minutes and 45 seconds in the first half. Have a look at Ozil then. He's a basket case. He's walking around, his head's down, he's got no energy, and yet he summoned it in the early part of the second half. And I think had Leeds had that ESP factor and that energy they had in the first 10 minutes of the second half, we would not. I don't think we just said, hey, why don't we play 10 yards further up? So, but it was the second half was the kind of game Guendouzi loves. I mean, he ran like a wolf, to the man's point. I think Arteta said something really clever in the presser too, which is kind of obvious, but he basically talks about us winning our duels in the second half, which is, if you like, that soft thing. I mean, I'm sure we decided to win our duels in the first half too, but we weren't. We won every duel in the second half, it felt like. And that allowed, and he talked about, and people making their runs. Well, there's no point making runs in the first half if you're losing all your duels to be in position to receive the ball that ain't coming. In fact, it's going to pull you out of position. So there's this strange hive mind thing that happens when the momentum goes with you, where the guy makes the challenge, you think he's going to win that ball, so you make the run. And to me, that was the difference in the first half and the second half. We were losing our challenges. People weren't getting into the position to receive the pass when we did win the challenge, because they just kind of assumed it was going against us. So frustratingly, I don't think there's an easy tactical answer to why we were better in the second half. It just suited Guendouzi, and he shone. I mean, he was feckin' great, but I generally all round we were sharper, more energy, winning our duels, people making the quick run to receive from that. As opposed to the first half where you'd have some guy, we had 5 runs up the field and nobody making the right run or any run for them. So,
yeah, well, let's get into a few other individual performances. I feel like I'm not going to tease out of either of you a detailed Guendouzi analysis in terms of a problem in the first half. And it's funny because I think there are some people that on second watching or thinking back on it have kind of changed their opinion of Guendouzi's first half, that it maybe wasn't as bad as they thought. And I certainly thought he's shown in the second half. I guess, Tim, to sort of wrap up the midfield conversation here, though, the one thing that I do think is very starkly different between Guendouzi and Xhaka is I still can't help feeling that Guendouzi is a player who is just a little better, more advanced. I don't think he thrives when he has to occupy the deepest parts of midfield. I think that's where his sort of lack of positional discipline gets the better of him. He has an instinct to range forward. He wants to extend the distances so he can collect the ball higher up the pitch. I don't know that he always defends well deep. I think he's a great job at jumping passes and intercepting up the pitch. I'm not sure he's as good defensively when he has to get deeper. I think Xhaka is the opposite, right? I mean, he likes to have the game in front of him and sit deep and distribute. And I thought it was funny. By contrast, Xhaka had a really uncharacteristic run. Maybe you remember this in the game where he just carried it forward.
Yeah.
And he got into the final third and he had options, but he can't give the pass. He just does. He had another one on the right side too, where he had Pepe on the overlap, and it's just not in him. I mean, do you think that's at least a fair observation, that maybe the difference between them is that Guendouzi would prefer to be a little higher up the pitch and thrives when he can get into the opposition half, where he can charge past a player and give a ball into the final third, where Xhaka would prefer to sit a little deeper and distribute that way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's one of the issues I think people have about assessing Guendouzi, is that we're not really quite sure what he is. And he doesn't really fit that neatly into. It's not like Torreira, right? You know what you've got with Torreira, you know what you've got with Xhaka, you know what they're good at, and you know what they're not good at, and you can categorize them quite nicely. Guendouzi is a bit trickier because he's not really a defensive midfielder. You wouldn't say he's a number 10, you wouldn't say he's a 6, wouldn't really say he's an 8. But yeah, like basically his game is kind of built around, like I think he's quite good at receiving the ball from the defence, but the only reason for that though is just because he's so calm. I think it's not so much his distribution from deep is amazing. It's like it's not a touch on Xhaka's. It's just he doesn't mind if he's like a bit crowded. He's confident enough to take the ball, which is in itself a big attribute. But really, I think his favourite thing is getting the ball kind of maybe just kind of left of centre, and just driving with it and just driving inwards, almost Rosicky style, really. I wouldn't say they're similar players per se, but Rosicky on the ball was just like like a dog with a bone, really. That was when you saw him come alive, and I think it's the same with Guendouzi. I don't think he's really that much of an off the ball player. He's someone who wants to be on the ball. But he wants a lot of touches. I think he wants to drive forward. And I think he's basically the guy really you want to carry the ball from the halfway line to the final third. I think that's kind of what we're looking at. And,
which is a really important role, by the way. We don't have anyone else that wants to do it.
It's exactly what Santi Cazorla used to do, really. Yeah. Maybe he did it a little bit deeper in his best form. It's what Jack Wilshere used to do as well. And I think you're right. I think he's got that pass. He's got a really nice pass, like in that kind of corridor between centre half and fullback. He hasn't
over
quite
the
got
underlapping half space pass right between.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
The layoff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's got that really nice like pre-assist kind of pass. He hasn't got like the Özil pass or the pass that like sets the guy in on goal, but yeah, he's really good at spotting the overlap and just kind of hitting that ball. And it's difficult to assess those players sometimes, and it's difficult to work out what to do with them because you can put him in a double pivot with Xhaka. He's not gonna sit there and stay there. I think what Emery tried to do as well was sometimes have Guendouzi as the receiver and Xhaka like a little bit further up. And I'm not sure that worked really. I kind of probably tend to have that the other way around. But it's okay. We're kind of discovering what he is, and the thing is, like, it's weird now where we've moved from 2 central midfielders to 3, we're so much more desperate to categorize them. Whereas in like the days of 4-4-2, it was just like, yeah, this guy's a bit more defensive and wins the ball, and this guy's a bit more attacking and might score you the odd goal. It's like Vieira and Petit. There's not like a huge distinction between those players. It's just, yeah, one's a bit more of a runner and one's a bit more of a playmaker. You just want to sit there. Keane and Scholes as well. Like, there's not like a massive like, oh yeah, he's the 6 and he's the 8. It's just, but in this kind of day and age of like a 3 in midfield, like we're in a big rush to like really kind of codify those roles, and actually to some extent a midfield 3 does kind of demand that separation of responsibilities a bit more, because in the old midfield 2 days it was just like, well, when the ball comes near you, do what you need to do, win a tackle and pass the ball, whereas now it's a little bit more structured. So maybe on one hand, Arteta needs to work out what Guendouzi is and how best to use him, but on the other hand, I don't think we need to worry about it so much, and we don't need to have so much anxiety about which particular box he fits in.
Yeah, that's fair. I just, if in my mind, and sometimes the picture you have of a game in your mind isn't accurate, but in my mind, if I picture this game and I think, where was Guendouzi poor in the first half? I would say when the ball was in our half and we were struggling to progress it, he wasn't either making himself available or getting into the positions to help us escape the press. And if I had to picture the second half, what he was doing so well, it's him from the halfway line forward, charging forward, creating opportunities, beating a Leeds player. He had that one really good run where he curled the shot just wide of the post. I think that there's more to come from him in the attacking half, and that's sort of where I see him developing. And as far,
I do feel Arteta can do a huge amount with Guendouzi in particular on really small things: how he stands, where he stands, body positioning, how his first couple of steps, how he turns, what he does when he's the guy receiving from the centre back and has to lay it back. I think a lot of the big aspects of his game, his running with the ball, his passing, his vision, is all superb. When you ever look at Arteta or a Guardiola talking to a player about how they stand, where they stand, all that stuff. I like the idea that Guendouzi's been taken out of the lineup for a few games, because I think he's been served well by Emery to be given this start in this career, but not well coached by Emery. And we basically took a wild child of the 60s, and he's still a wild child. And he's brilliant when he's looking upfield with the ball. But all the little things, all those tight spaces, all those quick decisions. I mean, if you think of Arteta, who was an unathletic, small player, he achieved everything he did for us with just clever positioning, footwork, being really tidy in tight spaces, and that to me is where Guendouzi looks really sloppy, especially when he's looking downfield instead of upfield. So I think he'll get a huge amount better under Arteta, but he's just not there yet.
Yeah, that's well said. I think the interesting thing is, as poor as I thought his first half was, and maybe I'm overemphasizing that, his second half was good. I'm not sure Xhaka quite ever came to grips with this game. I definitely think not making himself available put his defensive partners under pressure. And look, when you look at a midfield press, like Leeds had going on and man-marking players, the outballs, the fullbacks are really important outballs. And between Sokratis and Kolasinac on either side, I just, while I don't think either of them was tremendously poor, and Sokratis grew into the game and I thought arguably was one of the stars in the second half, they're not going to give you the same help in trying to break a press that, better, more technical fullbacks might. I was just going to say further to that, I think one of the important things about this game, and one of the things that influenced the midfield as well, is we didn't do that inverted fullback thing. Right. Well, we couldn't, right?
Yeah, because we had Sokratis there, and it was enough to ask him to play fullback. But we didn't do that, so it really was like a midfield 2 instead of a 3, which I think has been really key to closing some of those distances in recent games. So maybe that was like a big tactical element of it.
Yeah, and by the way, Nelson gets the goal and good for him, and I thought overall he was fine. Slipped a few times, had a few sloppy moments, but I think it also highlights to him a little bit how good Aubameyang has been working back from the left side, because I don't know that Nelson provided the same support and exit, and Aubameyang has really been covering every inch of that left wing since Arteta's moved him over there.
Nelson had 10 touches in the game.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually thought he was very good, but actually he was almost invisible, a non-factor in many ways.
Paul, a lot of that obviously is for half the game we couldn't progress the ball past the halfway line. Yeah. But I think Aubameyang is better working back to the ball than maybe Nelson was. And also, to be fair, we were probably emphasizing getting it to Pepe for all the right reasons. Before we move on to Pepe and Lacazette, who I want to have a word about, the one funny feature of this game with Xhaka that I thought was hilarious is, if he had a neon sign with him saying, "Please book me," he couldn't have been any more obvious in the first half about wanting a card. And the irony is he doesn't get a card and then spends the second half getting the shit kicked out of him and getting every Leeds player carded or fouled. I thought it was a really interesting dynamic. And one thing that I think about Xhaka, and maybe, Paul, since you've spoken about Xhaka's mentality quite a bit, I think what I'm sort of learning about him is he's just a very, very emotional guy, and that seems obvious. But I think he plugs in to whatever the prevailing emotion is and then turns that up to 11. So in other words, if things are going well and the team's up for the fight and there's camaraderie and the crowd's behind him, he's geeing up the fans and he's smiling and he's hungry. And if the fans are on the team's back a little bit and the game is going poorly, he's fouling and he's kicking at people and he's pushing people down. Is that fair to say that maybe just what it is as a very emotional guy, whatever the prevailing emotion of the game is, he just tends to emphasize that? Because in the first half, I really thought he was playing on the edge of being a little bit out of control with that.
Yeah, well, I think it's even more so he plays into the state of our game. When we're getting stretched and exposed, nobody's more embarrassed than him. And he's a guy who doesn't like to be embarrassed. And I just think it brings out the rashness in him. He was much cleaner in the second half, but then we were kind of on top. He does not like the fact that people are running around him, making him look slow. I don't think he deliberately says, "I don't like this," but it makes his blood boil, and he then goes in for that sliding. He did one of his sliding. Remember the penalty he gave away where he slid into the guy? He had one of those against Leeds in the first half on the left wing. I'm not sure who he was up against there, but it was outside of the box, but not by much, and he didn't manage to catch him, and he didn't get a yellow card because he didn't actually get a foot on the guy. But it was exactly the same in some ways as what he did for the penalty, and it was unnecessary. And I just think he hates that feeling of being the slowest player in midfield, people running around him, people making him look stupid, and he's not going to have it. And the way he's not going to have it is he's going to lash out and take people down, and he gets terribly rash. I think what you see with an Arteta, I still think that the first half in particular exposed how much of an Emery setup this was. Tim talked about it with the full-backs, etc. This was not an Arteta style setup here because he didn't have the players. And I think Xhaka was exposed in the way he was for an Emery side, and he didn't like it.
Yeah. And look, I think because the game ended well and because he spent the second half getting the shit kicked out of him, I can laugh about it. But it is one of the things about Xhaka that I think we do worry about is just the ability to get sucked into the negative emotional side of a game and let it take over his performance and control his performance.
And in the first half, all his flaws that we kind of hope might get fixed, they're all there, right? I mean, you see the
he's
full
not going to
Xhaka
change as a
half.
player, right? Like, you can put him in better positions, but he's not going to become someone different than he is.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, so Tim, one of the players that I think just cannot for the life of him get himself out of a rut is Alexander Lacazette. Now, what's interesting about that is he's been a phenomenally important player under Arteta for everything that he's done in build-up and on the ball and defensively and pressing. He just cannot get it right in the final third right now. And I thought there were a couple of moments in this game where he got into the box in good positions and could not get his shot off, could not get a pass away quickly enough. How worried are you about that side of his game? Is he doing enough other things that it doesn't matter? Or is it a situation for you where strikers have to strike, man? Like how big a problem is this?
So I think he's doing enough other things so long as Aubameyang's in the team as well, to kind of minimise the impact of him not being great in front of goal. I was reflecting on this the other day, and it's weird how quickly that confidence has gone, because he scored in Liège. The thing is, he scored some goals in December. It's just none of them really meant anything. He scored in the defeat to Brighton, so that goal was virtually useless. He scored away in Liège, who cares? And he scored twice against Southampton, one of which was a stoppage time equaliser. It just didn't feel like it. So his goal scoring contributions have been he hasn't gone months and months without a goal. So it's left him very, very quickly. But yeah, I mean, he clearly needs a goal at the moment because he's snatching
getting his
at
shot
chances.
away. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
You know the one I'm talking about was left. I want to say left channel in the box, and he just carried it
in the first half.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just couldn't get it out.
Yeah, and actually, Lacazette is one of those players. He's a bit of a Goldilocks shooter at the best of times. Anyway, like he's not an Aubameyang. He doesn't shoot pretty much on sight. Like, it has to be just right for him to pull the trigger. And actually, he's not been doing that. He's been kind of at any time, like he sees the whites of the post, he's like, right, I've got to get a shot off because I've got to get this goal. And so, I mean, yeah, it is a concern because we don't have that many goal scorers in the team. And yes, he's the centre forward, and he's a £50 million centre forward, and he's a good player, and he should be doing better in front of goal at the moment. And this isn't the first time in his Arsenal career he's gone through a little bit of a funk in front of goal. He did in his first season. But then we signed Aubameyang and he got injured, and he kind of just sat it out for a couple of months with injury. And maybe there's a bit of that at play here with his ankle, which we talked about a couple of pods ago. So yes, I am worried about what he's showing in front of goal. I do think one goal will completely change that. I do think it's one of them. He'll score and that'll be it. It will be fine. And I really like, obviously we didn't see it on this occasion because he didn't play, but I really like the way that Arteta's got them dovetailing. So he's got the left back pushed right up so that Aubameyang can move inside and move into the area, and that way also Lacazette can kind of stay on the edge of the box, which is, I think that's where he enjoys being the most, not in the box. I think he enjoys being on the edge of the box and being that guy, maybe to get a shot off, but being that guy kind of moving things around or picking the pass or holding off defenders. I think he likes that kind of physical contact and everything. But yeah, I think it's a mixture really. I think he's playing well now since Arteta arrived. But yeah, he needs a goal. He needs something to go in for him. Yeah,
and I think the good news is he's doing enough, Tim, without scoring. That's really important to what we want to do. And Aubameyang doesn't seem to be throwing any kind of strop playing out on the wing, and so it's not an issue we have to solve, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And we don't have to do that thing, sometimes where you think, oh, Christ, I might have to drop him. But if I drop him, his confidence is going to drop even more, Yeah. Do you know recently Roberto Firmino went nearly 2 months without a goal? And just before they went to the Club World Cup, he scored. And he hadn't scored for like 2 months and nobody noticed. Nobody noticed.
Well, to be fair, his job is to set the table for Mane and Salah.
Yeah.
We don't have Mane and Salah. Yeah.
No.
We do have Aubameyang. Yeah.
Yeah, and they asked Klopp about it, and Klopp just said, "I didn't even realise because of what you said." He's like, "That's not what I look for in Firmino's game, basically." Yeah. And I'm not saying Lacazette does it quite to that level. I'm not sure anyone does it to Firmino's level at the moment, but it's a fairly similar principle.
Yeah, and I would say, like, look, if we had a superstar left-sided forward sitting on the bench, you'd have to make some tough decisions, right? Because then you'd say, well, I might want to move Aubameyang to center forward and get that guy in. But it's Xhaka, who, with all due respect, phenomenal, but he's a kid. It's Nelson, who's not even really a left-sided player, and he's sort of one of the options on the right. And that's basically it, right? I mean, it's Martinelli, I guess.
Martinelli.
Yeah, so yeah. I think the upside to pulling Lacazette out of the lineup isn't enough to be willing to sacrifice what he's doing without scoring. So I tend to agree. I haven't agreed. In the past, I felt Aubameyang should be playing center forward and Lacazette should be on the bench. I think what we've seen under Arteta is it works having Lacazette in that role because of how important what we do off the ball is. Paul, before we shift gears and just talk a little bit about what this meant for Arteta and the influence he had in the dressing room, a real quick note on Pepe. I don't think he was like masterful in this game, but I still think what you see is what we kind of hoped for him to be, which is a guy who can just change a game by beating a player and creating space that wasn't there. He did carry us out of danger a lot on the rare times we were able to escape in the first half, did it a little more in the second half. And the goal comes from some individual brilliance from him and then a little bit of good fortune on the finish. Do you think that the way he is providing something that we don't have in the squad without him is going to sort of make him undroppable for Arteta now?
He should become undroppable.
I guess what I'm saying is, are you seeing enough? Like, I mean, is this game another reminder that there's something that he adds that without him we just don't have? There's no one that really does that thing.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really have a goal threat inverted winger apart from maybe Martinelli from the right-hand side. Or Aubameyang doing his thing, but he just, only probably Martinelli and Nelson have the ball control and the dribbling to do some of what Pepe does, but only Pepe has that, the goal threat, the hopefully world-class finishing we were promised by the Lille CEO there. Obviously,
I was really surprised when Lacazette took that free kick, and to be fair, he hit the crossbar.
He hit the bar.
Yeah. you better put it in the goal if you're going to keep Pepe off the free kick duty.
I think it's because Lacazette, like you, is very worried about Lacazette and believes he needs a goal. So, because he grabbed that bloody ball immediately, so made it very clear to the other two lads, Pepe and Luis, who was having first crack at this. And thank God, because Luis had the second crack at a free kick, and it was slightly comic. So, I mean, it's all about... I think we saw with Bielsa's team how effective a system is. And Pepe is one of those players that maybe suits early Guardiola at City, where he was playing his inverted wingers and he had overlapping fullbacks. So he'll do really well with an overlapping fullback. But at the moment, he's tending to use Maitland-Niles as more of this false fullback, pulling into midfield or at least forming a three and providing cover. So I think there's a little conflict in the system that may impact on Pepe. Where he's not the perfect fit for how he wants to use Maitland-Niles, and he doesn't always give Maitland-Niles the cover that, say, a Reece Nelson will. So it may be an interesting first season for Pepe as he learns Arteta. I think he's the one, he always strikes me as the guy who's maybe struggling a little with communication and being on the same page with everybody on and off the pitch. So it could be a transition season for Pepe before he's really embedded into the system. But he's obviously a class player. I think him and Lacazette were a huge part of why the energy in the second half was differently. That not individually, but their combinations up the right side were what ran rings around them with Guendouzi behind them. So He'll be a big player for us. I don't know if he's going to be starting every game though.
Yeah, look, you mentioned Martinelli, and just a quick word for him. I don't know that there's any price that I would sell him for right now. Now, I love to get over my ski tips on young talent, but like, he just looks like he's got superstar written all over him. And even in his short time on the pitch, he had that one move where he flashed a shot wide, and he gets the shot off so quick, and he strikes it so cleanly. To me, he's a center forward. I'd like to see him develop there. I know he can play on the wing, but I just think that as young as he is, to be looking as confident and involved as he is. I mean, you mentioned Nelson had 10 touches, and to be fair, he had to play the whole first half when we didn't have much of the ball or any of the ball. But Martinelli's on the ball, he's involved, and he's creating danger every time he's out there. Tim, let's finish with a word about Arteta here, though, and we've spoken about him a bit. But, I mean, I think the players let slip that he yelled at them at halftime. I don't think he wanted that known, but it was made known that he did give them the proverbial rocket, and it made the difference. One thing you worry about when you appoint a young, inexperienced coach is it's all fun and games when you're winning or when you're on the training ground and working on tactics. It's another thing when you have to mete out the discipline, when you have to show them who the boss is, when you have to fire them up. How important is it that the team responded so positively to that reaction at halftime and came out with the appropriate energy and appropriate effort required to go win this game in the second half?
Yeah, I think, look, we're in the honeymoon period, right? Where like everything's great. Even the fact that, let's face it, we were shit in the first half is great because we weren't shit in the second half. So I guess I want to temper it a little bit, but it shows they're responding to him. It shows that they respect him, and that they're not. And play like I think I said at the beginning, like a couple of pods ago, that Ozil was Arteta's teammate. It's that must be a really weird transition to, I was playing in midfield next to you for this club like not long ago, and to kind of instantly get that respect. Like I thought, it was an even better sign between the Chelsea and the Man U game, because they lost the Chelsea game, but they stuck with the plan for Man United because they saw past the result and into the performance. And so the fact that they responded, great. Now, obviously, apparently there's only so many times you can do that. That's the thing. Because if you keep ranting and raving at every kind of halftime interval, then it loses its effect.
Can I make one caveat to that, just real quick?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
I tend to agree, but what I would say is it stops working if it doesn't produce a result. You know what I mean? So like with Emery, it was clear that he didn't have anything he could say to them that could produce a result. When it works like it did here, I think I don't think it loses its effectiveness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and look, Guardiola, from the sounds of it, has done it enough times, because it's about kind of keeping that intensity in, and particularly this early on. Arteta's talked about every game is about being intense and about running and kind of setting that standard. So this was kind of useful to that effect, and to show that he's not kidding as well. But I think Paul's right. I think the reality is that the team didn't go out there with the intention to not be intense and be a bit crap in the first half. It's just that's kind of the way things happened, and I imagine even without a team talk, if Arteta had said nothing, they'd have been able to club their heads together and go, yeah, we need to do better than this. We need to run a bit harder and we need to get a bit further up the pitch. So it's not absolute managerial genius to say that, but you're right, the fact that they responded, that's the important thing.
Exactly.
And hopefully, like going forward now, going into Crystal Palace on Saturday, because what we've done in this game, still we got away with it, but we've done that thing that we used to do under Emery, which is just throwing halves of football away, and just saying, oh well, that's the first 45, we've done nothing in that, and I don't think Arteta will stand for that. And that's a really useful exercise going into a game like Crystal Palace away, where now he has Like, he has a real life recent example to say to them and say, if you start the first half of this game like you did on Monday, Zaha's going to fucking eat you for breakfast because he's 10 times better than any player Leeds have, and you'll be 2-0 down when you come back into the dressing room. So this is what I like. I'm not just saying we've got to be intense all the time just because I want to be hard on you, but because it's the best way to deal with the game. It's the best way to get results. And you know, hopefully that's just like another part of convincing them. Not that I think they needed convincing in words so much, but indeed it's kind of, and look, Arteta said this in as many words afterwards. He said they can choose which way they play between the first half and the second half, but I think they're all going to reflect and think, yeah, the second half was better. And to our point a couple of pods ago, it was more fun, even though it was probably harder for them and they had to work a bit harder. I bet they enjoyed it a lot more. That's crucial. And
I think that's an absolutely key point, Tim, that you've hit on, which is that it's one thing to say to players, work harder, run around more, but I think to say you're on the rack because you're not running around enough, because you're not switched on. Like, if you just up the intensity and sprint those 2 yards when you lose the ball and push a little bit higher when it's easier to just sink back into a shell, this will get more fun for you. You'll have more of the ball, which they did, 12% improvement in possession, you know, or not 12% improvement, but, you know, whatever, 120 basis, whatever that is, 1,200 basis points. Gosh, why did I do that? But you know what I mean? Like, Tim, it's the point that the game became more enjoyable for them to play when they put in that energy and when they were in the right position and when they were switched on. And I think that's an important lesson for players to learn that, oh, you know what? Being lazy, I was on the rack and the fans are on my back and I'm giving the ball away, and seeing the difference it makes when you switch on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at the Watford second half, for example, probably one of the, in terms of physical intensity, one of the least intense kind of showings I've seen from an Arsenal team. Did anyone enjoy that? Did anyone on the pitch enjoy that? Don't think so. So yeah, exactly. It's not just about run because me, big boss man, and you underling. It's kind of run because that's the best way to get the result. That's the best way to play the football that we want to play. That's what he's talking about with fundamentals, right? It's like, if you get this bit right, then we can do the diagrams and we can do the one touch, and you know, we can, all the stuff we use the rondos for, and I can get you scoring like lovely tippy tappy goals and tap-ins on the back post and everything. And by the way, wasn't Reece Nelson's goal reminiscent of, if not in the cleanness of the execution with the finish, it was, you know, that back post tap in for the winger. Seen that before somewhere. So, you know, it's very much do this bit and we can do like all of the fun stuff afterwards. But actually, this just is better, isn't it? So, and I'm sure like Arteta just comes off to me as so intelligent and switched on. I'm certain that's exactly what he'll say ahead of the Palace game, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I want to make the point too that one of the big cliches in football is that good teams win when they don't play well, and you know, it's important to win ugly. I couldn't disagree more. We won a lot last year playing poorly. And we continued to play poorly, and eventually we stopped winning, and eventually we lost a lot, and then we couldn't stop losing. You know what good teams do? Good teams play well. That's what they do. Do they occasionally get lucky and win a game they shouldn't? Yeah, you occasionally get unlucky and lose a game you shouldn't. I mean, City drew with Spurs this season when the XG was like 5 to 0.1, okay? So that can happen. But I think the reason this game is important is we didn't win this game ugly. We got dominated in the first half, and then absolutely battered the crap out of them in the second half. And on balance, by XG certainly, we wound up deserved winners. And the reason I think it's a huge credit to Arteta is we didn't just ride our luck and grind it out. We turned the performance around and became worthy winners of the game, in my estimation. And I think that is a very important distinction. We did, probably myself included, praise Emery early last season for getting some wins when he shouldn't, but we raised issues about the underlying performances. This is a game where if we had played both halves the same way, like we did in the first half, and wound up winning, I'd be worried. The reason I'm really buoyed by this is he was able to make the change that was necessary at halftime, whether it's effort, whether it's tactical, whether it's a combination of both, and then outperformed Leeds dramatically, and I'm sure helped a little bit by a drop in their energy and their level. But Paul, you want to finish with your thoughts on Arteta's team talk and the impact it makes and sort of what that says for him going forward?
Yeah. So I thought Emmy's description of it was very interesting. He said about Arteta, those black eyes roll over white, and then you hear that terrible high-pitched screaming. Oh, God. Now, you thought that was just a bit of shtick I did a few pods ago.
I still do, yeah.
Yeah. But I actually think Arteta has a very, very hard streak to him. He has standards that people have to meet, and he will be very, very direct and very quick to it. I think it's one thing to know the right thing to say, but Arteta knows the right thing to say before anybody else in the room, and so people listen to him. And I think apart from everything we've said about the second half, I think the other big deal was it was the second half, and we played not just the 10 minutes to get the goal, or 10 minutes plus another 10, or through to 80. We kept that intensity, which is, if you like, elective, for that full 45 minutes, because they did not want to go in and see that manager again. He wouldn't have been happy with just a goal and a win. If they'd slacked off, that's not what he needed for us to get. He has a very clear map in his mind as to what each game gets him and how it moves us forward that step. That's why I think this was a perfect game for us at a perfect time for our narrative after the United game. We felt a little too good about things. We took things a little too easy. This is part of his suffering 101 against the ankle biters, and we came out hard in the second half, and we maintained it for 94 minutes, and we could have kind of tried to control it, a little game management or whatever, which I'm sure we did to a reasonable extent, but we didn't back off, and the energy levels were there. Given that we said the first half was partly due to some fatigue, etc., the physical resources are there when you dig, when the hive mind says, this is what we need to do as a team. I think the second half was a really big deal because those energy levels, that intensity maintained for 94 minutes.
And I think we can throw this whole podcast out now because Adrian Clark just released his breakdown. So,
fuck.
No, makes me so mad. I think that's a good stopping point. That's plenty on a game that ultimately, I mean, is just about progression. You know, it is also cliche to talk about cup football, guys, but like, cup football is about survive and advance, and especially at this point, it's January. You've just come out of the crazy busy holiday period. You've got players who are tired. I mean, Tim, I know that I probably overemphasize fatigue and things like that, but I do think it plays a role, especially players who have said, I mean, David Luiz said after the United game, right, we're not there physically yet.
Yeah.
So
and
I mean,
we've seen like loads of injuries to other teams over this holiday. Well, when the games are condensed, like over the Christmas period, like that is definitely a time to rotate. Yeah.
And I think so. Okay, you can forgive them if maybe they try to switch off a little in the first half, and Arteta corrects it, and they put in the effort needed, and they get the victory. Thankfully, we don't have another game in midweek. Not that you'd expect that to happen when you're playing on a Monday, but it's sort of it's a catch-22, right? Because in a way, playing on Monday gave us a little more rest after United, which was desperately needed to face a pressing Leeds team. And in a way, it stinks because now we have one less day of rest for Palace on Saturday. But it does give us a chance to bring players back in like Maitland-Niles and Aubameyang and Torreira. So it's all good things. It is Bournemouth away, right, in the next round. So certainly a winnable fixture, if not, one that we've done great in the past. But with Arteta, all things are possible. Paul's on Twitter at Pause My Pants. Thanks, Pause.
Woohoo!
Tim's on Twitter at Stoberto. Thanks, Tim.
My pleasure as always.
I am off to Las Vegas, where I will not be doing anything untoward. But if I were to do anything untoward, obviously what happens there, I am told, stays there. So that's good. And in the age of social media, I'm sure that would be entirely true. So I hope you have a wonderful week. We have Scott's Analytics pod up on Patreon. We have Clive's First Transfer pod up on Patreon. Those will continue to come weekly. And then we'll obviously have a pod after Palace. We might try to get another one out later this week, but with travel plans, that's going to be a little difficult. So we'll do the best we can. In any event, we do love you. Hope you're doing great. And we look forward to talking to you after Arsenal 10, Palace 0.